ill to hospitals. So people with mental disabilities are first of all covered by the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, which is a federal law. Therefore, this should be the domain of the federal government or Congress to set standards. Laws passed on a federal level guarantee uniformity and fairness for individuals, no matter what states they reside in. Left to the states themselves, standards would vary from state to state and would be dictated by budget. Also lead to unequal treatment from state to state. This would also increase the chances of states busing the homeless people to other states, much the way cities do in some states where benefits can be different from county to county. Until the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, people were treated unequally under the law due to the color of their skin. Up until the passage of the Civil Rights Act by Congress, discrimination was based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, which was accepted in many states due to the fact that the standards were left to the states and that were determined on their own. Standards could be set on a federal level, with states adopting laws that uphold the federal standards while enabling each state to tailor the compliance with its own needs. Now, the problem with the states having to have for them to take charge of all the changes is that, first of all, they've already been having all these problems. There's variances from state to state depending on, they each have different, qualifications on how to get into a mental hospital. And this is the problem because I believe that each state should be equal and it's hard to communicate with each other state. And also because of this, when mental people, when they don't think that, when they're kind of in disagreement with the state and they don't uphold those laws within the states, if they don't believe that they don't have to go to the mental hospital based on their laws, they could just bust them off to different counties. So then they can go to the mental hospitals there. That's why the states should actually take this into consideration that the federal government should take control of this. Because the ADA that's actually sponsoring them is actually by the federal law. So this is actually explaining that the state shouldn't even be taking charge of this in the first place. It should actually be the federal government. If each state divides their own standards, this would lead to a wider variance from state to state in terms of law, like I said earlier, regulations and enforcement. States automatically would lean towards lower standards due to increased obligations inherent in this kind of legislation. Federal standards could come with financial ensure a higher level of compliance and attention to those with mental illness. It is more likely that the federal standards would be more likely to be in line with case law regarding involuntary confinement. Connor v. Donaldson was a landmark decision in mental health law. The United States Supreme Court ruled that a state could not constitutionally confine a non-dangerous individual, thus saving more financial resources that would otherwise be spent by local governments on legal challenges to their laws based on standards defined by a particular state. So overall, this whole resolution of the states having to change the standards, it shouldn't even be in their hands, it should be in the federal government's hands. Because there's actually been a history, when I was preparing for this debate and I was looking up online, there has actually been a history of when the states have been trying to have it in their own hands, there has been actually higher problems and it's been making it worse for people to go into the hospitals. So that's why I believe that in general, that the federal government should actually take control of this and not the states. Thank you. I yield my time to the chair.
So would anyone like to speak for justice? Okay,
So I just really want to go over some points. I don't really want to introduce anything new, but I want to go over some points made by both prior speakers and what I agree with and what I don't agree with. So the idea of imminent danger is definitely a provision that we really need to change because coming from a background of therapy, I understand that it takes a lot longer than 5 to 7 days or even 24 to 72 hours to determine and treat mental illness. Like it takes a lot longer to deal with what's going on in your own head. And so I think that this imminent danger provision, especially considering like this is policy that's actually dictating like the fate of lives of people both involved and not knowing that they're going to be involved. So I think that's a huge problem. Second of all, let's talk about what stopped mental hospitals from being in frequent use. During like the 1980s era, there was a strong movement from judicial activists to move back the mental health hospitals and to allow people to be protected, or because there were horrendous conditions in American mental hospitals, and many judges felt like there was severe constitutional discrepancy with making someone go to a hospital beyond their own will. And I think that part of the reason that these laws were passed was because there were such horrendous conditions in mental hospitals. And so I think that we really need to perhaps find a better system, or at least expand on the good system. But I do think that mental hospitals should be put in use, and there should be some reform to revert back to a system in which mental hospitals are used. And so let's talk about some points made by the speaker. She very elaborately made a great case. I feel like she was pretty brilliant in finding a way to defend her own case, because this is not an easy case to defend by any means. And so I really respect that. But the ADA, the problem with using the ADA as a standard is that just because a law is still in existence doesn't make it infallible or immune to change. And so I think that we should perhaps change the ADA to allow people with mental disabilities to be admitted to mental hospitals which have moral and reasonable standards for them. And so let's talk about moving it to federal standards. So first, the one problem with this argument is that allowing states to do it would lead to great variance. Well, that's kind of what the Constitution is. Variance in laws exist because the Constitution in states. So states are supposed to make what laws they feel best for their citizens. And so if a person or a family with a person with mental disabilities or mental illness moves to a state with better mental health care treatment, that's within their rights. There doesn't need to be some sort of unified standard regarding this, especially considering that it's not a right enumerated by the Constitution of the United States. And second of all, let's talk about why these federal standards would both be inefficient, because they would be impersonal. They wouldn't protect these people on a personal level. And this really personally affects me, and I really feel passionately about reforming the mental health system in the United States of America. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shane McCracken from Corona Del Mar, and I'd like to say the proposed speaker said standards for involuntary commitment should be decreased. This statement is completely wrong. I can assure you in this using the short anecdote from David Rosenhan, a professor at Stanford University. This professor, using multiple colleagues, went to psychic wards all over the country. And at each psychic ward, he had his colleagues try to get admitted, saying they had symptoms of seeing things and hearing things, common for schizophrenia. They wanted to basically get themselves admitted to see if the system was broken. So these pseudo patients did indeed get admitted. And actually, they stayed for an average of 19 days at these psychic wards. And they actually acted normal there. They acted as no symptoms had even occurred. They acted as they normally would because they were in fact normal. So when they attended with these normal conditions, they still were considered schizophrenic in remission. So basically meaning they still had this condition. So saying and claiming that the standards for involuntary admission to these psychic wards to be decreased is wrong. Because people that are normal are said to be schizophrenic. People without any conditions like you and me, who have perfect lives, are admitted. They're admitted and said they are crazy, which is innately untrue. And the second part of Rosenthal's experiment was basically going to a psychic ward and saying, I'm going to bring a few test subjects that aren't crazy and see if they get admitted. In fact, he brought no one there. But out of 193 patients, he suspected 41 of them were crazy. 41 of them were normal people. 41 of these patients out of 193 were normal. But in fact, he invited no one. So none of the patients had a problem. So it goes to show that these standards should not be decreased. They should not. They should be kept the same. Because the reason being, if we decrease these standards, more normal people will be put into these psychic wards. More people like you and me without a problem will be put there under false pretenses. Thank you. I'd like to yield my time to questions.
For those patients on medication, because if they're on medication, then their actions would have changed. Unlike those that don't have any medication, then of course they're going to still be psychotic. That's me.
Actually, the patients that went there, they had no conditions, so they weren't under any conditions. So first of all, they were normal people like you and me. They were actually psychologists themselves. So when they went there, they had no medication. They were normal people. So when they went there, they acted completely like they would every day.
Why did they end up there?
Because they wanted to be pseudo patients. They wanted to see that, could you get admitted? Could it be possible? And that's why the standards shouldn't be decreased. Because innately, we're admitting people who are, normal.
Okay, so should the experimentation of one professor at one university in one United States, in one United State or one state in the United States be used to dictate public policy holistically?
Actually, this was done all throughout the United States by multiple psychologists all over. There was about 50 of them that went all over the United States. So it actually was pretty good engaging because there were many different psychologists.
Motion to extend it by 1 minute.
A motion seconded.
Second.
Anyone opposed?
Okay, questions, everybody?
Anyone opposed the motion?
What time period did they?
I'm sorry. Sorry. It was in 1973.
And back then, people thought that, people with different sexuality.
Here. And they looked at it and reestablished it and said, can this really affect modern day? And they really went back and questioned it, but right now it wouldn't make sense to redo the experiment because it's regulations at this point. So no, unfortunately. I have 0 second time. Sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, if you look at the, as the experiment was performed, performed what they believed to be a good interpretation of what a schizophrenic behaved like, as people who were well aware of what they behaved like. And after being admitted, after the doctors could detect these symptoms that these well-trained psychologists were able to perform, they stopped exhibiting these behaviors. But if you look at, schizophrenia? Schizophrenia loops. So there are times when they can be very manic and they can hear voices, and there are times when they can level. So from a medical standpoint, their behavior would actually seem normal and justified. As I've had many friends who are schizophrenic, there are times when they do seem a bit manic and out of the loop, and there are just long periods where they seem fine. And again, bringing up this point, this is the 70s, and these are very different standards than what we have nowadays. Another fact that was brought up was she brought up, that this is a by state issue, and by only solving this as a state issue, it doesn't solve it at a federal level.
But I'd like to make the point that just because it's at a state level, we shouldn't deny the benefits to a as a mass. So if it does benefit these people by state, it seems a little silly to not give them the ability to proper treatment just because it's a by state level. And if it's to improve these people by state, it seems that the benefits of this would outweigh the fact that it would be different from another state. And as the other proponents, the speaker brought up, the states have a right to variance, and that's why we are capable of passing laws at a state level, because certain states might not agree with something or other. And this is parallel with gay rights in the LGBTQ plus community with marriage. There might be some states who do not support gay marriage and will not perform it, and there are some states who allow it. And just because there's that variance, it still gives people the right to move to those states for treatment. Any questions? I think I have 30 seconds. Yes.
But did you know that the experiment often sometimes went up to 72 days? So are you going to claim that 72 days?
Well, they were admitted there for the purpose that they actually exhibited signs of schizophrenia, and as these well-trained psychologists were able to perform those signs, that's why they were admitted, and as they were there, they stopped performing those symptoms. But because of this variance, and because schizophrenics have been tended to be compulsive liars and tend to keep the things to themselves, it would be unwise to just unadmit the people just because they stopped exhibiting symptoms while in treatment. And people with schizophrenia usually will have to be observed for very long periods of time before they are released, with or without medication. You don't want to take the time. Thank you.
Now, since we have only 10 minutes left, may someone
Motion to previous question.
thank you. Does anyone agree with that motion?
Second.
Anyone disagree? All right, motion passed. So would our call speaker like to speak?
Yes.
Okay, so Shay had brought up a good point that that a bunch of normal people had gone into the mental hospital, and that they did by the standards they were able to go in. And I think a big issue based on this this resolvement today is that people keep thinking that the standards they only allow certain people in, and that's true in some states. But with here it's pretty easy to get into the mental hospitals, and I do agree that yes, that they do have a lot of flaws, but it's going to take a long time to fix those problems, and we have to go step by step. And like I said earlier, it is a job of the federal government, and I do still passionately believe that it should be all the states as the same, and not separate states. Because even though I know, especially here, it's pretty easy to get into a mental hospital. I haven't lived in any other states, so I'm not sure about the standards. But when I was reading some of the standards online, it said right at the top that we don't guarantee these standards, we don't enforce these standards. And looking at that, you might think that I'm contradicting myself, but I'm actually not. I'm going on to the point that the federal government actually needs to take control of this, because if they put that there, it just shows that they're not really enforcing it that well, and it also shows that it needs to be enforced in a different way, but in a way the federal government takes control of it, and where all the states are equal. And the thing is, if the states are equal, it's going to be so much more easier to let mental patients in, because if we're looking at all these different states and they have all these different laws, it's going to be very confusing to follow them, especially if here it's easy to get in, but other states it might not be. And looking at the other states, if a patient can't get into that mental hospital and they actually need the help, it's going to be really difficult for them to be sent to a different state, and that's what I'm mostly worried about. And one of the speakers said that with schizophrenia, how they need lots of time to heal, and I do definitely agree with that, and I agree that there are flaws, but I think that the first step is to let this go into the hands of federal, because it would definitely make everything more easier for everything to be under control. And yes, there are many flaws to mental hospitals, but I feel like we need to take one step at a time. Thank you so much.
Hi, all pieces agree. I just wanted to say that the proponent and opponent side did bring up some great points about this, but it still stands to the fact that we need to revise the state laws because, especially laws in California such as yours, well, the LPS Act, have been in place since like the 1960s and have been revised since then. But we need more revision on those acts that have been in place because I feel like revising the state laws will make much more of a change than creating like a new federal plan because of how long these have been in place. I just wanted to reiterate the fact that we do need change. We cannot just leave it that background, like the history of mental illness is not looked at, and that that this is like an immunization. It's not just we can't just look at the 24 to 72 hours. We need to look at what they've been experiencing, and we just change it. That's about it.
Thank you to our speakers. We will now be voting on the resolution. Resolved that states should revise the standards for committing the severely mentally ill to hospitals. So those in favor, please stand up. Thank you. You guys may all sit down. Those who oppose the resolution, please stand up. Okay, you guys may sit down. And those who are abstaining, please stand up. You guys may sit down. So with 26 for pro, 10 for the con, and 10 abstaining, this resolution passes. Now, may our speakers please come up and introduce themselves to the audience?
Also known as
I'm just not pleased. Thank you. Staff. One remark, I'm sorry.
I know, Ariana.
Hi, nice to meet you all from University High School. Yeah.
Sophia.
I'm Vita. Yeah. I'm Justin Whittakin from Santa Margarita Catholic High School.
I'm Shay McCracken from Front of Del Mar.
Olivia Leland, just right OSHA.
I'm Suzanne Arnold from Corona Del Mar High School.
Uni High School. Okay.
Bobby the Kraken. Get Bobby the Kraken.
I can't get out. Exactly right.